thank you. Y'all just, those of you have a seat where you got a seat, and great standing room only. Tillman, thank you for opening up your place, and Tillman's trying to get that smile off his face from this weekend's Cougar victory. That was quite a ball game. Yeah. The Saturday night, I was getting these texts at midnight from Tillman, keeping me tuned in. I told him, I said, "I'm watching it, Tillman. I'm watching it." He said, "Yeah, but you ought to be here." It was pretty cool. It was. Congratulations. Thanks for your service, Tillman. As and so many of you who serve the state of Texas in various and sundry roles. I know Joe Pennington. We just swore Joe in as to the T-Close board, so his service to our state, and so many of you who serve either on boards or agencies or have been engaged with the Republican Party in Texas, and thank you for that. You're making a difference. The Senator was correct in his statement about what's been created over the course of the last few years relative to the Texas economy. And it's something that I'm very proud of. It's people like him who have worked collectively with us in the governor's office to implement programs, policy changes, tax structure, and regulatory changes, and pass the most sweeping tort reform in America to stop this pervasive oversuing that was going on in our state, that was driving people away from the practice of medicine and businesses out of this state. And it has been a very, very productive 6 years in particular, as we put Texas at the apex of all the states. We are the envy of the other 49 states. And I tell people, I said, I'm not sure that I could get all the other 49 governors to admit they won't be Texans. But I'm pretty sure I could get them all to agree that they would love to have and be over an economy like we have in the state of Texas. An economy that's growing every day by at least 1,000 people a day. An economy that now finds itself to be home to more Fortune 500 companies than any state in the Union. We're the #1 exporting state for the 7th year in a row, I might add. We are the #1 destination for people who move from one state to another for the 4th year in a row. You know, and I tell people, that's voting with your feet. Because people find these tax policies and regulatory policies so onerous in other states, and they go, where can we go where we can enjoy more of what we work for? Where can we go to just enjoy more freedom and liberty in our lives? And time after time, that answer is Texas. They're coming to the state of Texas to be a part of this great state. And I tell folks, I said, there's a lot of reasons. I said, one of those is you can have a Texan as a neighbor. That's another great reason to come to this state. And it is. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do. As other states have made some, what I consider to be some bad choices over the last decade. I tell people, governing is not, the theory of governing is not difficult. Let me put it that way. So I tell people proudly, I'm just a little animal science major from Texas A&M University. You don't have to be a PhD in political science from Harvard to be able to understand the principles of government. The difficult part is in implementing. The difficult part is having the courage and the discipline and the principles to implement those tax policies, regulatory policies, pass legal reform in a state like Texas, and continue to prioritize the spending. You think back to 2003. I tell people, I say, if you want to know when this phenomenon that we're involved in right now started, it was in 2003. It's going to be a little bit partisan here, so if anybody gets their feelings hurt by talking partisan, just put your fingers in your ear, man. Some people think that Texas has been a Republican state for decades. We weren't. We weren't a Republican state when George Bush got elected governor the first time. There was still a Democrat-controlled House, Democrat Speaker, Democrat Lieutenant Governor. We didn't become a Republican state the day that I got sworn in as the last statewide elected slot that was held by the Democrats. When I took my hand off the Bible in 1999, all statewide elected officials were Republican in Texas. But we still weren't a Republican-governed state. That did not happen until January of 2003, just a short 6 years ago. That was the day that we elected the first Republican Speaker of the House since Reconstruction back in the 1870s. So we've only been in Republican control, if you will, Republican principles being what are coming out of Austin, Texas since 2003. And if you'll recall, you go back, that was the year we had a huge budget shortfall. Remember, we got there in like January, and they said, oh, by the way, you got a $10 billion budget deficit that you're going to have to deal with. They'd spent too much money in the previous legislative sessions. We had a bust of our technology bubble, so the resources started down. We had to deal with it. There you go, Republicans, y'all deal with it. And we did. What we had said to the people were, if you will elect us, we will treat this state differently than it's ever been treated before. We will cut the spending. That's the type of... We're going to treat our budget like you have to treat your public or your personal budget, like your small business. Is that when the resources go down, you don't just automatically raise the cost of your widget or whatever. You can't, because you'll go out of business. You don't have a printing press like they got in Washington, D.C. Tough, principled decisions, sometimes very uncomfortable decisions. And that's what we did in 2003, because we stood up and we said, if you'll elect us, here's how we'll perform. And we did that. And we cut $10 billion out of that budget in 2003. It's the first time since World War II there's been less general revenue spent than the previous 2-year budget. Since 1945, every 2 years, Anthony, the budget spent more general revenue money until 2003. And we cut that budget. And we also passed that very sweeping tort reform, that session of the legislature, that today is paying huge dividends, both in the access to health care that we have and the cost of doing business in the state of Texas. Billions of dollars of impact in a positive way to the Texas economy. Just for doctors, it's my understanding, $600 million have been saved since 2003 on liability insurance for doctors alone in the state. Hospitals are being able to put more money into technology and into expanding their services rather than having to spend it at the courthouse defending frivolous lawsuits. I mean, that's what you've been a part of. And the members of the legislature that helped us get there, my hat is so off to them, because this has been a team effort. Perry just didn't show up in town and say, oh, we're going to do all these things. It was men and women working together in Austin, Texas to do this. It's one of the reasons I get a little bit frustrated with those who would come in and criticize Texas for political purposes. Who want to come in and tear down Texas, tear down what we've done here for political